All right. Hey, everybody. How's it going? Stage here, Hive Live.
Nicola, Chin. Nice to see y'all.
We're broadcasting. We're building an audience right now, so we're just going to say hi. We're in Lewiston, Maine. I can see snow out the window. It was great to see y'all in Albany yesterday and in Amherst the day before. Super excited to be back in Maine. It's going to be a great couple of days. We're going to talk with Nicola today. Tomorrow we're going to learn about naturopathy. Like, I still don't totally get what naturopathy is.
I trust it.
Yeah.
Even if I don't know it, I trust it.
That's so awesome. Right. Like, we're gonna talk to an amazing naturopath tomorrow, Dr. Aline Renee. I'm sure I'd probably just cranked your name. Monday, on Martin Luther King Day, we're going to talk about retreat and the importance of restoration with Jen DeRasp out at Nurture Through Nature. And then on Tuesday, we get to talk with a 5-element acupuncturist, Ann Helfrich. So there's a couple more people. I mean, it's just like, it's going to be a phenomenal week. We're going to end, in a week we'll be in New York City at the Women's March. We're going to talk with some incredible folks down there. So just wanted to give you a heads up on what's coming with Hive Live. So, but here we are today with just sort of checking the signal, make sure we're good. Yeah, good. We got a couple people watching.
Cool. Hey guys.
I want to introduce Nicola Chin. I'm so happy to be here. A colleague, a friend, somebody who's doing a phenomenal change work in the world, working with organizations, businesses, helping them think about how to increase capacity and impact for social and economic change. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Coach, leader, organizer, mom. Tell us, just give us a little snapshot. Who you are, a little snapshot of your personal life. We'll start there, and then we'll get into some of your work.
Yeah. Well, I fell in love with Lewiston about 7 years ago. So I'm based here in Lewiston, Maine. I love the neighborhoods. I love the intergenerational feel of being here in Maine, and also the intercultural feel. We had an immigration rally this morning with a lot of friends and neighbors, so it's a fun place to be. And I work from home, which is awesome because I am in like month 15 of making the transition into motherhood, and it still feels like a transition. I think lots of thoughts every day that I'm like, wow, on October 31st, the day before my daughter was born, I could not have understood the meaning of these words that are going through my head right now. So I think I'm in a mode right now in life where I'm trying to balance action time with thinking and reflection time. To let myself go through that transition and feel really blessed to be supported in that way. And when I came back from maternity leave, it was just kind of this huge explosion of creativity. So I was always afraid of writing, and I always felt like my writing wasn't good. But when I came back, I said, you know what? I'm going to start a newsletter. And this month I said, you know what? I'm going to start like a Dear Abby column for organizers who want to learn about like organizing best practices.
A Dear Abby column for organizers? I didn't even know that's part of what you did.
Well, I just started it, so we're collecting questions now. If you have questions about community organizing, send them my way. And it's called Brass Tacks, because when I was first hired as an organizer, one of my mentor's favorite phrases when things were really hard was, Nicola, we have to have a conversation about brass tacks. We're going to get down to brass tacks. So, in this moment, it feels like everyone around me is trying to find their own brass tacks. Like where do I need to volunteer? What is the way I need to authentically show up? And it's really beautiful to be inspired by folks doing that in the world right now. So it's a lot of where my heart and my head is at right now.
Well, and it's such a poignant and potent moment to be, I mean, that so many of us are asking, like, where is the most, how do I intersect my heart with the most effective place to put my time and energy right now in change or whatever you're doing. So I think that's like so exciting to sort of be creating a forum to talk about
blessed.
Some of that.
Yeah.
So great. So your mom and coach, why don't you maybe just tell us a little bit about your work and maybe a story about how you came to it.
Yeah. Well, so it's interesting. So I think the seeds of me coming to it were really probably in elementary school and high school. My dad's from India, my mom's third generation Polish, and both of them came from very working class / poor backgrounds, and with a deep faith life. a deep social justice faith life. They weren't conservative by any means, but they were very spiritually grounded. And there were kind of two messages I got working my way through the Chicago public school system. One was kind of this, Chicago, Jane Addams, Dorothy Day, like, service is the meaning of your life. As an altar girl, everything, all of that stuff. And the other was like, you have the opportunity to achieve what we never had access to, right? And, with great benefit comes great responsibility. And I think that, I was really living this double life all the way up through college, where I was, first I was studying BC calculus, then I was studying organic chemistry, and I was like, I'm not a scientist, y'all. So then I went to economics, right, which is like, okay, great.
Totally.
But at the same time, I'm like doing comedy improv, and I'm like living in a halfway house in Tijuana, Mexico, or I'm like doing organizing in France with immigrants. Finally, those two things kind of came to a head a year after college, and I said, I have to really follow my heart, and that was into community organizing.
Wow.
So I worked at the national level on community organizing at the Center for Community Change for 4 years. And that's where I met my husband and started coming up to Maine from DC and New York. And that led me on this path of about 12 years of community organizing, right?
Can I just pause you and say, like, how would you define community organizing?
Because
I feel like we talk about it a lot, but to a lot of people that aren't familiar with it, like, what would you say the gist of community organizing means?
Well, a lot of times when I tell people I'm an organizer, they literally think I'm a closet organizer. like I have like multiple times been asked, like, can you organize my closet? I was like, I can, because I'm a type A Virgo, but that's not what I'm professionally trained in. So so the way I think about community organizing is it's really about helping people who are directly impacted by a problem or an injustice, naming that problem and injustice, uncovering their assets to solve it themselves, and then like moving to change. And really, I see community organizing is ultimately about changing relationships of power.
Okay.
And really at the deepest systemic level that we possibly can. So was doing that, trying to change immigration laws. I was doing that working with youth here in Maine at the Maine League of Young Voters. And through that journey of doing community organizing, I worked with amazing people who were so talented. But maybe you've experienced this when we get into groups. We're human beings, and our brokenness comes with us, right?
Yeah.
And we can have these beautiful visions. I got to this point where I was like, there's no end to really good ideas, but finding solid implementation is hard. And there's lots of things outside of our control that can keep us from achieving our dreams and our goals. But I kind of always had this pit of my stomach that was like, but isn't it a shame when we're our own worst enemy, when we're in our own way, and what can we do to get out of our way? And I think part of what drew me to that was my own getting out of my way and saying, I'm not an organic chemist. I'm not a math genius. I like teaching, and I like working with people in their struggle.
There's so many different things that, like, internally can get in all of our way. And I love that you're speaking to it. I love that we're gonna like normalize it here, because I just feel like there's so many people, even who've been watching these interviews, that are saying, oh my God, like I just have, my fear has just been in the way for my vision. And it's just like so exciting to hear, like, that's totally normal. And like, how do we sort of source and resource and support each other in organizations to be able to keep, being able to touch in with what's most important with us.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. In doing this work for the last 4 years, I started my practice about 4 years ago. That's when I really realized the things that felt like they were blocking me, every single human being has. And I think, I was kind of raised to look at the New Yorker profiles or the person on the front cover of the New York Times and say, well, they figured it out. They know the answer. And, when you spend any time with someone, you realize we don't have the answers.
Right, like the person on the front of the newspaper, like if you really had an honest conversation with them, you would sort of have this, there would be this wonderful achievement, but there would also be these stories behind it that were just as challenging as anybody else's, perhaps.
Right. And in my work, there were kind of, in trying to help organizations and teams get better and get that impact, I kind of saw the same thing over and over again, right? Okay. One was, we'd talk about strategy over here. And certain people on the team got to talk about strategy. The men, the straight people, the white people, the educated people, whatever it was for that organization, right? Then we talk about organizational development over here. That was often very gendered towards the female. That was often very gendered towards lower levels within the organization, right? And then we talk about racial justice or gender justice or class justice.
Interesting. That's down here.
Right.
We're going down.
Really. Right? And it's like we bring someone in for a workshop for like 3 hours, you know, or 6 months, and then we're done.
Or an hour.
Right. Or, and this is like our fad of the 90s into today, is we hire one person or two people to be the leaders of equity, but it's nobody else's job. So one thing I saw was that siloing was just so detrimental to our ability to do anything. You know what I mean? Like to achieve. So the first thing I want to do was break down those silos and say, I don't know everything, but like I often work in collaboration. So I'll partner with other consultants who might be experts in certain areas. But what I really try to do is design the overall intervention that breaks down those silos. And another thing I saw was we didn't leverage adult learning best practices and just be honest with like how we change behavior. So there's a couple of books out there that I really like. One is The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. And the other, and this is like going to be super cheesy, and I don't like the kind of moralistic Judeo-Christian overtones of it, but it actually has some really good advice in it, is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
I know you were going to throw
Yeah.
I think everyone, that book.
I know, but you know, I'm revisiting it now, and I forgot. I remembered locus of control, and I remembered like, you know, all those things, but I forgot how much of it is about paradigm shifting. You know, and I was like, if there is a moment when we really need paradigm shifting, it's right now.
All right.
So what I like to do is break down silos between those 3 different schools of thought and help people think about, how do I not just hear a great idea? How do I live it? Yeah.
And paradigm shift. That's so, I mean, and you're talking paradigm shift individually and collectively, right?
Yeah.
I feel like, you know, I'd love to hear a story or two about, I want to talk about wellness within organizations too, which I think you've already touched on, but
well, I mean, for me, this is my definition of wellness. So I think when we go, one of the phrases that I learned from Brianna Twofoot, who's someone that I worked with really early on in this work, and big shout out to her, was I was exposed to the idea of bringing our whole selves to work, which as a multiracial person was like, what? Because I was so trained in code switching. And this is the part of me I bring here, and this is the part of me I bring here. And so when I'm talking about breaking down these silos of identity and organization and strategy, it really is also about breaking down the silos in ourselves.
Yeah.
Right?
Because that we've learned.
Yeah. And when I look out at the world, I'm like, there's this illogic to say we can be a part of these really dysfunctional workplaces, but then we'll do really great volunteering on the weekend, and then the world's going to work out. Right,
which is pretty typical.
Yeah, and when I think so many of us have been exposed to workplaces where there's a choice made that really undermines someone's health or well-being. I mean, we can all think of those stories where somebody doesn't get maternity leave, or somebody's not getting paid sick days, or somebody gets passed over for a promotion, or whatever it is, right? And I think at the root of that, I feel like I can trace back this division between, well, I'm my professional self who has to make tough calls, and then outside I love my kids and I love my family, but not yours. You know what I mean? It's like, so
and how much and how that is just the norm. Right.
Yeah.
Like for a long time that's just, we've internalized it, and so we sort of play our part in it, and it still doesn't quite feel congruent. But we sort of say, well, I got healthcare and I got my salary, so I'm not gonna, you know, like we're just, I'll do that, right?
Well, and we say that, and we slowly die inside over time. I mean, that's like...
we say that, and we slowly die inside. I don't know if anybody out there resonates with that.
We've experienced it before. So I try to, like, stop that train. So a couple of stories.
Yeah, great.
You know, so one story, and I'll see this more in generals just because of confidentiality.
Of course, thank you.
You know, one is I often get approached by young people who are exposed more in like this millennial whatever culture to things like microaggressions and like talking more openly about racial justice or gender justice or class justice. And they're in organizations where they feel like they're going crazy because they know their mentor or their boss has a great heart and cares about these things, but for some reason it's not translating into the organization. So they'll often come to me and say, how do I start that conversation? And I don't know if it's because we've watched too many like Gandhi MLK movies, but I think a lot of times our first thing is I have to say the right thing. I have to like bust open my boss's door and like lay down the truth in my like monologue moment. And I don't think that often serves us in uncovering why and what we want. And I don't think it serves the other person, because that's not how they're going to hear it, right? So often what I get a lot of joy out of working with folks who are asking themselves, how do I engage other people in this conversation? To take a step back and say, well, what are the layers of your intention, right? Maybe you're pissed off about X, but you may also be seeking some other deeper things that they could get behind with you if you were able to uncover that, right? And then 2, how do we not climb the ladder of inference? So I think we often see the person at work who's doing the wrong thing, and we create a story about why they're wrong and why they're bad, and we've already lost their humanity. So how are we going to work together? So the second thing I like to invite people to do is ask questions before speaking first. And I hesitate to say that sometimes when I'm talking to like a young woman of color or someone from a marginalized identity, because we already have to carry so much burden, right? So I say this with a lot of care and intention, in the sense that like, yes, we do carry a lot of burden, and I don't know how to build bridges across humans without understanding our own intention and asking questions. There's certainly moments. I mean, one of the lines in the sand I always ask is somebody doing something illegal? You know what I mean? Like, there are lines in the sand where I'm like, yell it, say it, you know.
Yeah, sure.
But if it's more this, like, how do we get out of our heads and into our hearts a little bit more?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like if you sort of, you sort of have some investment in staying, right? So there's that, like, sort of being able to say, oh, I want to stay at this job. It would be great if it could work out. Then there, even with the burden that's being held, like, there is, that instead of like polarizing things, there is that sort of, it would make more sense, because it's going to be less energy in the end, and maybe getting to a solution quicker if we start with intention, engagement, and questions. I mean, I love that sort of slowing it down there.
It really is slowing it down when there isn't an urgent matter that needs to be addressed.
Right.
And the other story that really came to mind when I was thinking about like what gets me up in the morning, what gets me inspired, is when I get to work with a senior leader within an organization who's been successful for a lot of years, doing it the way they're doing it, particularly when it's, in many cases it's been a people of color, but really of any identity where you're outside of the dominant culture and you've still made it and you've still gotten to that place. A lot of times we've gotten to that place with traumas or microaggressions that no one's ever given us the space to name or claim. And then sometimes in not being able to name or claim it, we then have perpetuated it onto others. And so sometimes I get the opportunity to really witness and walk with someone who is coming to the realization that the things they are doing to others were really done unto them.
I mean, we're talking such delicate work here.
Yeah.
This is so powerful, so vulnerable.
Yeah.
Right?
And people have given me the opportunity to really be with them in that vulnerability, and it's been really special.
Yeah.
And so, I do draw a clear line that, like, I'm not a trained social worker. Like, if there are things that we touch on or reach that are really, like, at a therapy level or, like, at that level, I encourage folks to, like, seek those supports in other ways and definitely don't try to step into that space. But to the extent that someone has the personal resources, I know for myself, I did a lot of personal work outside of my professional life. And I got my family stuff together. I got my relationship stuff together. I got my friend stuff together. And I did not translate it into work. And I got an opportunity to be a leader. And I really made a bunch of mistakes that were really not about people, And I was lucky enough to find a consultant or a coach who got that personal stuff, but wasn't my therapist, right? Who I could talk to about my personal identity work that I had done in another space and do that translation into the workplace. So that's what I feel like that's where I feel like I can excel. is help people do that translation. So, you know, I've gotten to see some of these senior leaders really step back and paradigm shift, right? And like name a truth for themselves and then be that truth to people that report to them and people that they're leading. And that's just the best.
Yeah, well, because if you're in a higher leadership position, you are able to incorporate your personal work, healing, transformative work you've done, and you're able to sort of all of a sudden like have light shown on some of how you're maybe perpetuating still some of the wounds with somebody who's safe.
Yeah.
Who's not judging, who's saying, I've been there.
Because I have.
Yeah, exactly, right? Which is part of why I know it probably is so powerful for people. Because you can be with them in this way that's so kind of personal. Because it's so vulnerable. And then be able to literally change the paradigm, really heal, actually, and potentially heal some of the system in the process, right?
Well, and what's so fascinating is, you know, having to have this conversation about what's personal and what's professional and where's the line, especially in social justice. You know, well, if my organization says they're about racial justice, but I don't know if I am, can I still work here? Or, you know, I mean, that's a tough question. Well, I don't know.
Sure.
So, you know, it really does lead to these really important conversations where people are like, well, that's not work. And I'm like, and that's part of the problem. You know what I mean? Like, we're human beings here and we're human beings in the street, and we got to bridge those two things.
Yeah. That is for sure. And I think that is going to be so much of the work in the next whole bunch of years that we all need help with. You know?
Well, and on my Hive directory little profile, I really love that there's this question of like, what's your favorite quote? And I put my favorite 2017 quote, which is, to lead people, you have to love people, and to save people, you have to serve people. And if I look at the things in it that really led to the world we live in now, it's like just so clear you can see the pain and the trauma that like collectively have led us to this political moment. And there are these moments and these organizations that I can say, I don't think you were loving people. I don't think you were serving people. You said you were saving. You said you were leading. And so that's really been what I'm curious about for 2017. Is like, not just how do you have a good political strategy, or like how do you grow your organization, or how do you hire the smartest people, but how do you do it in a way that is oriented to love and service, such that you can have a lasting impact. And I think that's the key.
Can you just talk a little bit more? Like, I mean, it's so powerful. Like, how can you do it in a way that's oriented to love? I mean, love is like love and service. And is that like, is that a call to a certain quality of being with each other?
I would say that, and one of the things, I mean, and you've had a lot of posts, Sage, that have inspired this in me as well. One of the first things for me is that love is not Care Bear.
Okay.
Right? And so, you know, I think we both had a lot of posts on Facebook after the election where, you know, we had to express like sadness and anger, and, you know, and I loved these two letters, open letters that I found on, some of you have probably seen them online. One was an open letter on, I'm going to forget what it stands for, but AIHS, from an African-American female intellectual, to an open letter to white liberal women. And another was by a woman down in Boston who does racial justice work, and her name's escaping me now, but I wish I could remember, to other white allies. Right?
What we can do is we can find those
That's
and we'll
right.
put them in here. Yeah.
Great. You know, and like the second one, probably a lot of people could see the love easily, right? Because it's caring and it's kind, and that's important. That's an important expression of love, right? The first one, I think there's a lot of folks that would read it and say, well, that's just angry. Well, that's just, you know, and what I really wanted to uncover after the election is like, yes, sometimes love is anger. Sometimes love is indignation. You know, it's not violent, hot anger, right? It's a cold anger connected to indignation. That's another book shout out, Cold Anger, which was the first book that one of my mentors, Sona Yoon, had me read when I became an organizer at the Center for Community Change. And it really gets into this difference between hot anger and cold anger.
So it's called Cold Anger.
Cold Anger. Yeah, we can put that link in there too. And that's, you know, that so when I think about love and how do you ground a strategy in love, I think first about deep commitment to authenticity and radical truth, because I think that is at the heart of love. It's going to be uncomfortable. And
we do not talk about this enough. Can you just, so it's deep commitment to authenticity
and radical truth.
And radical truth.
Yeah.
And that could be anger.
Yeah.
That could be all sorts of
discomfort. I'm feeling, and one of the most important things in my journey, and you actually really helped me with this, was to be able to say to people, I feel embarrassed.
Totally.
Because I did so many ugly things to avoid just saying that.
I feel you. I feel you.
But yeah, so I think that for me is love. And service, I sat in this training once. Great training, great trainers. Mm-hmm. But we were all, like hotshot organizers. We're like, yeah, we're gonna change the movement, blah 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 blah. And I was like, what is this really in service of? Like, we're in a little echo chamber right now. Mm-hmm. Like, we're in a hotshot echo chamber right now. Mm-hmm. So now one of the number one questions I ask someone when they come to me, and they say, after this election, or after Black Lives Matter, or after whatever, I really want to save, or I really want to help X person who is not of their identity. Mm-hmm. I love that desire to help. Mm-hmm. But one of the first things I ask is, would you have dinner with that group of people on a consistent basis? Would you have that person into your home and not just volunteer with them on the street? And that's what I think is about orienting strategies to service, is do we want to be in radical relationship to people? Because there's a way to quote unquote serve people without being in relationship to them.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love that you're speaking to that. So that kind of just brings it back to connect to part of how you're sort of saying, sort of bring the love is like the sort of deep relationship, and ask yourself those questions, like really start to get clear, and in your intention and in your actions, am I serving or am I like in radical relationship? Right? Yeah. And that is, talk about breaking, the paradigm of white savior complex, of the way that we've been set up to serve in nonprofit infrastructure. There's so many systems and so many sort of paradigms that are sort of still support separation. So it's so exciting and powerful to be naming love at the center with radical justice work. Yeah. Good. Anything else you want to say about all that?
That's great.
All right.
It's a lot.
It's so, how amazing. This is so, I feel like there's so much value and principles kind of being thrown down here. So super excited about that. So I want to kind of just shift a little bit, and it's not even that big of a shift because it's all the same, really, I think. Right? Is to talk a little bit about resilience, sustainability, community, and self-care, right? Whatever words we want to use, and maybe a little bit about your own journey with that.
Oh, yes.
and then talk about sort of how you help organizations think about that. Yeah. Right? Like kind of how you came to your own, because I just feel like there are a lot of people out there, whether it's social workers, organizers, healers, that we struggle with sort of how to take care.
Yeah. Well, I'll go to one place. There are a couple of places that come up. The first place was, I think I understood self-care in a new way doing some of the somatic work with you. Mm-hmm. I'm a hyper-verbal, hyper-intellectual person, and that is both a strength, but it's also a defense mechanism that can keep me from having to actually admit the things that are true in my body. And I had a lot of great talk help before I had seen you, but I also knew something was just off in my body. And in our work together, I think there were like some truths about things that had happened in past generations, and even in like pre-memory for me, that were still resonating. And there were choices I was making because of the things I chose to held on to. It wasn't anybody else's stuff, it was my stuff. And so learning new tools and techniques that were nonverbal, to drop into my body, to release, to be seen and to see, was a really important inflection point in being able to like take care of myself and others,
What's one thing that opened up for you?
Well, one thing that's funny, this isn't funny, but like every time, so before that, my husband and I had been dating for like 3 or 4 years. Every time he got sick, I yelled at him. and I got really angry. And he was like, why? I'm just sick. Like, why are you yelling at me? And I'm like, and all of this, I like very slowly started to realize the anger I had towards like body. You know what I mean?
Wow.
And just like that feeling of like loss of control around body and all of that. And so I think when I really had to start to get into my own body, I found a lot of new sources of empathy. So that now, you know, like when he gets sick or I get sick, like I'm not angry anymore. I mean, that's like a simple version of it.
But you like were able to slow it down enough to sort of say, okay, what's really going on here versus just whatever the adaptive habit was around it.
Yeah. And then I think that's made me a less angry person at work and to my friends. You know, it kind of has multiplied in lots of other areas.
Well, and I love you said that just because when we're able to start to slow things down and whatever you want to call it, mindful meditation or just mindful awareness in the body, even being able to start to do that creates a systems change in the sense of we're not running on our sort of autopilot. And so when we start to, it's kind of uncomfortable to stop running on autopilot because autopilot is kind of like the way we know to get through the world. And it's like a beautiful thing and it's usually really smart and strategic, but it often cuts us off from other parts of ourselves. Right? So when we start to slow it down, we start to pay attention, it can often be a little uncomfortable at first because we don't have our sort of same protections and defenses, but some of that, you know, discomfort kind of can, if we can get underneath that, it can lead to this whole new, almost like frontier of experience and therefore possibility.
Yeah. Well, and one of the, I think, and the thing I would add that came up for me as I was listening to you is sometimes I talk to folks who maybe haven't experienced that type of healing themselves, or are in their own like immediacy urge. And so they want to make other people get off autopilot, you know? And I think that's a really dangerous draw, especially I think in the type of work that I do.
Okay.
Because I have a lot of power to come in and say, you should be like this, you know, especially when people are trusting me to come in to that intimate space. And so anyone who kind of works in this work with these types of vulnerabilities has to be really careful about that word should. And that word, like, you have to, you know. And I think what was so important about the body work that we did together was like, while I was getting off of autopilot, I was the pilot. You know what I mean?
That's right.
And it was all an invitation.
All an invitation.
You know?
Absolutely.
And so I would just add that into the mix. Is sometimes we want to like knock people off of autopilot, and that just is continuing the violence that we're trying to end, you know?
Really well said. Yeah. Really well said. Yeah, so now given your full life, you want to just talk a little bit about how you care for yourself, like...
Yeah. Well, I'm a geek. I am a super geek at heart. And so one is I have to read lots of science fiction. I mean, I've got like 70 science fiction books on my Kindle that I've read, you know, and many of them since having a baby. Like, I gotta get that. So Anjali knows, like, Mama's reading. Okay, I get to bite her Kindle every 20 minutes, but then I gotta go do something else.
That's awesome.
So that's one, is like really making intentional time for my imagination.
Love that.
And then two is, and I know this is gonna sound really dorky, but like, I gotta put time in my calendar for me. Yeah. And so when my calendar says it's the end of work, like, I take that super seriously. Like, no more emails, no more phone calls. Like, I am just, everything is set aside just for these people right in front of me right now. And continuing body work, you know, and continuing to do that. Like, it's not a one and done, you know. I think sometimes there are these moments in my own journey where I'm just sick of my own voice or like sick of my own stuff. And so I want to be like, oh, I'm healed. So then I can just like, you know, stop now, you know. And I think breaks are cool and there's ebbs and flows and all of that.
Integration times.
Yeah. So it's not like it's this constant thing, but I think right before Anjali was born, actually, I was like, you know, I've been feeling really good, but like, this is a big life change. And I put a couple of care providers in my world, preemptively before I even knew what I would need them for. Like some postpartum doulas that I reached out to and interviewed, some people to talk to, some yoga classes, just like, I don't know when I'm going to use this, but we'll see. And it's like every single person I needed, because I couldn't know what was going to come.
Yeah, so you set it up.
Yeah.
That's just such great modeling for anything that's coming up that's like really big, right? It could be having a baby, it could be a surgery, it could be anything, like just sort of thinking about how to put things in place so that it can help absorb and process and support change.
Yeah. And I would say one other self-care thing I think that has come up, particularly from getting to listen to other women of color that have been coming up in social media right now. So I think about like Another Round. There's just some great women right now that are sharing.
Couple other, you want to just...
I gotta think. That's cool. The one that I just listened to, but...
Yeah, great.
But I think one of the things, especially after the election, is just like allowing myself to cry or cry in public or cry with others, because I don't like to cry, and I don't like to cry in front of others. And tamping down and trying to control those emotions when things are this bad was really doing a lot of harm to me. And so I had to make some space to say, I'm going to have some emotions in public. And that's not always safe, if you're not a part of the dominant culture. So I had to be calculated and intentional about it. But that was an important part of my journey, was being able to be in my emotions with people in public.
How's it gone?
I think it's I don't do it in unsafe places.
Real thing to do, and it's so appropriate right now.
Yeah, I'm gonna grab a cough drop. Sorry, guys, I gotta blow my nose.
It's so sweet that Nicole took some time to, even when she's a little sick, to be with us. Really appreciate it.
Sorry.
No worries. We'll probably start winding the interview up anyways, just because you got the cough coming on. No, you're not really sorry. I just want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for, I just feel like there's so much, I feel like the organizational pieces are so incredible. What you have learned, I hope you write a book. Actually, I hope you write it soon. Because I feel like I'm often in contact with so many organizations that are just like, we don't know how to do, they don't say we don't know how to do it. They sort of say,
something else is wrong.
Yeah, and they're like putting the one person of color in the board still, which is still so old, but, and so I'm just so inspired by the value that you're bringing to the world, and I think that it's so relevant right now within social and economic justice organizations, but also in the healing world, right? We have a lot of different trainings and schools that are training tons of people. Even talk about yoga trainings and things like that. Yeah. And a couple of interviews ago, we talked about how to be integrating a social justice lens in yoga training. So it's like if maybe we could wrap up just talking about like the vision of integration of the healing, the world, whether the healing world, the healing capacities, and social justice, and how we can continue to build a capacity where it is just and inspired and really working for all of the people.
Well, that brings my head to a really simple place.
Great.
I've often worked with folks who have a really clear vision of their values and have gotten to the point where they're saying we're not living our values or we're not actually using our values in our organization. How could that be? Like, we're an organization that does democracy and supports democracy, and yet we have the most undemocratic, hierarchical, internal, like, how do we fix that? And the simple activity I like to do with people, and you do it a couple of times to repeat to find what answers come up over time, is take that value and take a part of your day and deconstruct what 5% change would you see in your day if that value were up for you then? Right? So like when someone is talking about equity and, they're a finance director or, it doesn't have to be like I'm the big face of everything, you know?
Yeah, no, it's actually more effective probably when it's the
like,
finance director.
Like, you know, I have to, like, meet out these policies, or I have to, like, respond to these communications, or, you know, I run my own yoga practice, and I have to decide how much to charge, or I have to decide how to serve this community. You know, what would it look like for equity to be in that half hour, in that meeting with X person, or in the execution of this one project? And I, like, literally like to hear, like, I would ask this question instead of this question. I would prioritize this over this. And then I'm like, great, let's try that.
I love that activity.
It's just that simple.
It just makes it manageable,
just
right?
Simple.
Versus, like, how do we change everything? It's like take a half an hour of a day that you know so well.
Yeah.
And, like, what could we do different? And we think about it together.
Yeah. And look for that 5% change.
Tell me about the 5%. Why 5%?
Well, I think that's just, like, I don't know. I think maybe I got that from, like, organizational development stuff. But, you know, it's just that for human behavior, it's really hard to just change everything all at once. And, like, all of a sudden I'm going to be, like, an equity warrior. You know, when, like, status quo has raised me to be ignorant of that my entire life. Like, that's just so unrealistic. So I like to look at 5% change because it's manageable. We can focus on it. We can do it for 2 weeks and then focus on a different pattern.
Right, and we can be successful.
Yeah.
Probably with 5%, which then integrates into, you know, then the sort of paradigm starts to shift and everything's more possible.
Well, and one of the things I like to talk a lot about with the integration of social justice is the role of pleasure. And joy. And part of this comes from my comedy and improv background. But part of this is, you know, when everything is so dark and hard, you know, like, there's just this little animal being inside of us that wants to avoid it. You know?
I do.
And goes into protective mode. And it's really hard to learn when you're in that defensive space. And so the more we can, like, while we look at the darkness, give ourselves some moments of pleasure on the journey, that just recharges our battery to keep going. And it draws other people who might not have the same worldview as us to try it out and try it on, you know? So permission, allowing space for pleasure, for enjoyment. And I love that you sort of said recharge and how that's connected to, like, being able to come, you know, having given to ourselves in our families. It creates a whole different thing that we can bring back to our work. Well, and why I love bringing in the body to talking to intellectual folks about their work is that we often make the mistake of thinking mindset shifts before behavior. So we want to go around and we want to tell everyone, this is what you should think about Obama. This is what you should think about Trump. This is what you should think about this. And then we think if we've told them the right thing, they'll do it. And that's just not how human beings work. And that hit home for me when I watched the movie Blood Diamonds. Because Blood Diamonds has this really stupid line in it where it's like, well, if everybody knew about the diamond trade, no one would buy diamonds. And I was like, everybody's still buying diamonds, even though Leonardo DiCaprio made this movie.
It's such a great point. It's perfect.
It's kind of silly. But I think sometimes what we have to understand, and this is why we go back to, it's not always about telling someone something, but it's about starting with questions. Is that sometimes humans have to change behavior. Before then they say, okay, maybe I'll change my mindset too.
That's beautiful.
Just throw that in there.
I love that. I think that's a great place to kind of wrap up.
Right?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
So good to
everybody.
See you. Thanks for watching, y'all. Thanks for having us here in Lewiston. It's so great to be here. There's so much amazing work and organizing work going on up here. So happy to visit. We're back on tomorrow at 5 o'clock learning about naturopathy. I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing that right, so I'm going to learn about all of that tomorrow. Hive Live, Hive Directory, a directory of healers and change practitioners, right? We're sort of redefining what healing is. It's not just this or that. It is all of this work that's happening in organizations, it's happening in social justice, that's happening in the sort of holistic health realms. And Hive Live is really, I think, you know, it's so great. I was kind of like figuring out what it is as we go along. And each person who's like so different, but the threads are so the same, right? They're about healing and liberation and about paradigm shift, about possibility, about authenticity and relationship building. And it's just so exciting how many ways we can do it. So Thanks for watching, everybody.
Thanks.
Big love. Thank you, Nicola.
Yeah.
And we'll see you tomorrow.
Bye, y'all.
Bye, y'all.